Welcome back to The Explainer. Today we're untangling the massive legal web surrounding Andrew Tate, probably one of the most talked about and controversial figures on the entire internet. Now, you've probably heard about his criminal charges across Europe, right? But what if I told you his biggest legal threat, the one that could actually bring down his whole empire, is happening somewhere else entirely, right here in an American courtroom? Yep, we're talking about a civil lawsuit filed right in Los Angeles. And this isn't just some side story. This thing cuts right to the very core of his brand, his money, and that whole persona he's so carefully built online. So let's get into it. Back in March of 2023, a woman named Brianna Stern, who's a model and was once his partner, filed this lawsuit. And the allegations? Well, they're incredibly serious. We're talking sexual assault, battery, and what's known as coercive control. The lawsuit lays out this whole 10-month timeline. It apparently started with a big business offer, something very appealing. Stern's side of the story is that Tate was super charming and generous at first, but that it was all just a setup, a facade that quickly devolved into this alleged nightmare of control, threats, and ultimately violence. And when you dig into the details of this lawsuit, it gets pretty disturbing. A huge part of the case rests on some really shocking allegations, and Stern's lawyers say they have the receipts, in the form of text messages they claim are from Tate himself. For example, the lawsuit includes these alleged text exchanges. In one of them, he supposedly just straight up says, "You need to be hit." And when she asks why, the alleged response is just, "You deserve it." It's incredibly blunt. And then there's this one. It's a lot. This kind of message, if it's real, really paints a picture of the kind of control and degradation being alleged in these court documents. It suggests a mindset where violence isn't just an accident, but like a fundamental part of the dynamic. So the claim is that this wasn't just words. The lawsuit argues that all this verbal and emotional stuff eventually boiled over into actual physical violence. And there's one specific incident that's really the core of this entire case. And the details here are really graphic. The lawsuit claims Tate choked her until she almost passed out and beat her over and over. But here's the key part. Her lawyers say this isn't just her word against his. They claim it's backed up by medical records showing she was diagnosed with post-concussion syndrome afterward. Stern eventually did a public interview about all this, her first one. She talked about just how terrifying that alleged assault in the hotel was, saying she was literally scared for her life. And that fear was apparently real enough that she was able to get a temporary restraining order against him. Okay, so that's one side of the story. But what about Tate's response? Did he stay quiet? Not a chance. He came back with a full-blown, aggressive counterattack. So let's just lay it all out, side by side. On one hand, you have Brianna Stern with these very specific claims, backed by what she says is evidence. On the other hand, you have Andrew Tate's team basically saying, nope, all of it is a lie. They call it a blatant cash grab, claim the texts are fake, and even argue that her injuries were just from cosmetic surgery. A total 100% denial. And he didn't just say it was a lie. He put his money where his mouth is. He turned around and filed his own lawsuit against her for defamation. And get this, he's asking for $50 million. He's claiming she made this all up as a huge smear campaign just to ruin his name and get rich. So now Stern's lawyers have to fight that. They're trying to get his countersuit thrown out of court. And their argument is pretty interesting. They're basically saying, how can we defame him when his entire public brand, which he built himself, is already synonymous with misogyny? And to prove their point, they're using his own public words, like this tweet, against him. Okay, let's zoom out for a second, because this is really the most important part to understand. Why is this American civil case such a big deal, maybe even more dangerous for Tate than the criminal charges he's facing over in Romania and the UK? I mean, look at this. He's literally fighting wars on three fronts. You've got the criminal cases in Romania for human trafficking and in the UK for rape. Those could mean serious prison time. But the game is played by a completely different set of rules in a US civil court. It's a whole different animal. And here it is, the absolute key difference. In a criminal trial, the prosecution has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a really high bar. But in a US civil case, the standard is just a preponderance of the evidence. All that means is the jury only has to be like 51% sure. They just have to think it's more likely than not that her story is true. That is a way easier bar to clear. On top of that, there's this thing in the US system called discovery. It's huge.
It basically means Stern's lawyers can force Tate to hand over all sorts of stuff: documents, emails, financial records. He could even be forced to give testimony under oath. And you gotta wonder, any evidence they dig up here could absolutely be scooped up by prosecutors and used against him in those other, much more serious criminal trials. See how it's all connected?
So, what this all comes down to is more than just a legal fight. It's really a collision. It's the carefully built, untouchable online persona of Andrew Tate smashing head-on into the cold, stark reality of an American courtroom.
You've heard him talk about it, right? He frames everything, all these legal problems, as an attack from the Matrix, this idea that there's this big, shadowy conspiracy out to get him. And it works. That story fires up his millions of followers online who really believe he's this hero fighting the system.
But here's the thing, that whole Matrix story runs right alongside the brand he actually built for himself. A brand based on, extreme ideas about masculinity, wealth, and dominance over women. And that's the irony, right? The very persona he created to get famous is now the exact thing Stern's lawyers are using as a weapon against him in court.
So where does this all go? What's the end game? Well, most legal experts are looking at the situation and saying the same thing. The risk for Tate is just too high. You've got the risk of a huge financial payout, and maybe even worse, the risk of giving his other prosecutors more evidence. So the most likely outcome probably isn't some big, dramatic courtroom showdown. It's a quiet, confidential, and probably very large settlement to just make it all disappear.
And when you step back, this whole saga really makes you think about a much bigger question, one that's super relevant today and has nothing and everything to do with Andrew Tate.
It's this. In an age of influencers and online personas, can the courts actually hold people accountable for what they allegedly do in the real world? This lawsuit is a stark reminder that no matter how big your online following is, no matter how much you talk about being outside the matrix, the real-world rules of law and accountability can still catch up to you. That line between the online character and the real person, it's getting thinner every single day.